Bruh, they're squeezing the life out of the East Coast Mainline with the December 2025 timetable, while simultaneously not having any long-term plans for High-Speed 2's Phase 2. This is crazy. Welcome to The Truth About the East Coast Mainline, episode number 7, I think.
Please exit through the rear door.
Doors open.
As always, thanks to my patrons. Your donations make this content possible. Alright, let's talk about an East Coast Mainline where there are 11 long-distance services per hour, all day, and still maintain some sense of reliability, unlike the December 2025 timetable. This would see 2 trains per hour stopping at King's Cross, Grantham, and Nottingham, 2 trains per hour from King's Cross to Wakefield and Leeds, 2 more trains per hour from King's Cross to Leeds via Micklefield, 2 trains per hour from King's Cross to Edinburgh, 2 trains per hour from King's Cross to Newcastle, and 1 train per hour from King's Cross to various locations past Doncaster. Now, in this scenario, it's assumed that all long-distance services are provided by 10-car units compared to the 5 and 9-car units we see today. Not only would it provide direct services to Nottingham via the East Coast Mainline, which would improve journey times, but it would also reduce all-day crowding south of Peterborough, between Sheffield and Leeds, and between Doncaster and York. The average time between King's Cross and Leeds would be 1 hour and 50 minutes, and between King's Cross and Edinburgh at 3 hours and 45 minutes, with King's Cross and Nottingham being 1 hour and 20 minutes. For freight on the East Coast Mainline, there would be 2 trains per hour between London and Peterborough, 2 to 3 trains per hour between Peterborough and Doncaster, 2 to 3 trains per hour between Doncaster and Colton Junction, 3 to 4 trains per hour between Colton Junction and Newcastle, and lastly 1 train per hour between Newcastle and Edinburgh. Cross-country services would also be extended to be 10-car electric rolling stock, capable of running at 140 miles per hour where possible. This would provide additional capacity with 2 fast trains per hour between Sheffield and Leeds alongside the existing regional services, improving journey times and increasing the interval of services. There will also be new journey opportunities by providing a linking service to the north of the East Coast Mainline using a new connection at Newark. 18 infrastructure improvements would need to happen in order to make these services possible. 2 of them are already completed, being the King's Cross Station Throat remodeling and the new platform at Darlington. Now, for the rest of these projects, they're either planned or aren't planned, but would need to be completed in order for improved service on the East Coast Mainline. And for the sake of this video, I've listed them from being not so difficult to being extremely difficult. A dynamic loop between Peterborough and Doncaster, a dynamic loop between Micklefield and Leeds, new platforms at Haringey and Hornsey, Leeds station capacity increase, a new downside platform at Grantham, and quad tracking the East Coast Mainline to Nottingham Branch Junction, York Station's northern access improvements, Doncaster to York's improved freight capacity, line speed improvements to the fast line between Biggleswade and Darlington, electrification on the Great Northern Great Eastern Joint Line, and between Nottingham and Grantham, the level crossing closure program, upgrade to the Stillington line, additional capacity on the corridor between Sheffield and Leeds, Newark grade separation with a new connection to the East Coast Mainline to the north, reopening and upgrading the Leamside line between Tursdale Junction and Pellall with a new alignment to Chesterlet Street. And for this last needed project, we're going to need to get a little bit more of an understanding of the track layout and the service patterns for suburban services on the East Coast Mainline near London. So I brought on Luke from LTR Trains to help with that.
Starting at Stevenage, the line has 4 tracks, and just below the station, the Hartford Loop branches off. This is a line that runs parallel to the East Coast Mainline through, Hartford, obviously. We'll get back to that in a second. Back to the main line, the quad track continues south for 1 more stop, down to Nebworth, after which the line narrows down to only 2 tracks, due to some tunnels and then the impressive Digswell Viaduct, which isn't especially wide. Anyway, just past the Digswell Viaduct we go back to 4 tracks. Then nothing really interesting happens until Alexandra Palace, where the Hartford Loop appears again, joining back onto the East Coast Mainline. At this point we're effectively up to 6 tracks, and the mess of depots around it. This area is a bit confusing. This continues until Finsbury Park, where the Northern City line starts, running under the ground to Moorgate. Thameslink trains run with everything else for a little longer, until they head under the ground to cross the city, calling it the low level of St Pancras just across the road from King's Cross, where everything else ends at.
So why did we need to take a pause for this explanation? Well, because the final project is the complete separation of suburban and long-distance services between Alexandra Palace and Biggleswade. This will require the entire segment between King's Cross and Peterborough to be quad-track, which will require new tunnels and new viaducts at Welland, which is easier said than done.
Now, you might have been looking at my badly drawn map and been thinking, what about the Hertford Loop? Surely that avoids the issue. And yes, it does, but not very well. To understand why, we need to talk about the sort of services that we see on this section of the East Coast Mainline. Starting off with the Great Northern services from Moorgate. These run through the Northern City Line, basically a funny underground line that isn't the underground, to Finsbury Park, and then run along the 6-track section of the East Coast Mainline until Ali Pali. Here the line splits. Half of them continue along the East Coast Mainline until Welland Garden City, just before the viaduct, and the other half run to Stevenage along the Hertford Loop. There are currently 2 trains an hour to Welland and 2 trains an hour to Stevenage via Hertford, for a total of 4 trains an hour below Ali Pali and into the city. Great Northern also runs some long-distance services out of King's Cross, with 1 train per hour to both King's Lynn and Ely, both of which have their first stop all the way at Cambridge, and then also some long-distance trains that stop a bit more, with a Letchworth Garden City and a Cambridge service both leaving once an hour. I can't be asked to read out all of the calling points, so here's the table on Wikipedia. These stopping services and all the trains from Moorgate use the slows, with a bit of freight. Everything else is on the fasts. When we get to Ali Pali is when things get a bit interesting. The Stevenage via Hertford trains leave to join the loop, along with all the freight, and the Welland and long distance stoppers stay on the East Coast Mainline until, well, Welland. So basically all the trains on the Hertford Loop are the slowest trains, and the Hertford Loop has quite a few stops. If that wasn't enough, the line speed on the Hertford Loop is mostly 75 miles an hour, compared to the 100 to 115 on the East Coast Mainline. Running any intercity service through here would be painfully slow, no faster than the stopping trains, unless you want to cut back service to leave a big enough gap, but yeah, you're not getting anything fast through there. Although trains can be diverted through here during disruption, there is actually a bit more space to run trains on the Hertford Loop, but this will almost certainly be for increasing the frequency of Great Northern trains into Moorgate, as service on this route and the route to Welland haven't yet returned to the pre-COVID frequency of 3 trains per hour, and 4 trains per hour should be possible on both too. The limiting factor on this seems to be how many trains per hour can be turned at Moorgate. Although it seemed like everywhere I read about this said something different, TfL has also shown that they're interested in taking over the service and bringing up the frequency, although it's unclear whether or not this will happen, and honestly, aside from the frequency increase, TfL can't do much with this service except for some new signs and branding. Then there's Thameslink, the other operator that heads under the ground. Thameslink enters the tunnel just before King's Cross and stops at St Pancras. Trains then continue through the city, making frequent stops before coming back to the surface again at Blackfriars. Then trains split across many different branches and loops and everything in South London and continue toward the coast. I've made a whole video about Thameslink and all its issues on my own channel if you're interested in that, but Thameslink does have a little more capacity in the core, maybe just for a few extra trains per hour, but there just isn't space on the busy approaches to the South London termini, so it can't really be used. And anyway, all the Thameslink trains run on the fasts, and those need to cross the Digswell Viaduct too. Aside from some extra Great Northern trains into Moorgate, there really just isn't space for more trains on the East Coast Mainline in the London area, and there isn't anything that could realistically be done about this. That's why High Speed 2 needed to go to Leeds, and I've said this many times before, High Speed 2 isn't about saving 10 minutes to Birmingham, it's about increasing rail capacity on basically every significant city north of London.
Hello, Michael C here from the Channel Network News. This time I've been brought in to discuss how the delivery of HS2 to its original scope is the only long-term way to resolve the East Coast Mainline's capacity woes. For context, originally HS2 was meant to split at Birmingham into 2 branches towards Manchester and Leeds, with both branches also featuring connections to the existing rail network for services running further north. However, it has since been cut back to just run between London and Birmingham, even though some of the biggest capacity constraints it was meant to address are actually north of Birmingham. I've got a whole video on it, but that's not what we're discussing right now. The first way HS2 could alleviate pressure on the East Coast Mainline is actually something which could be achieved in its current, albeit very reduced, form. that being running the London to Edinburgh expresses via HS2 and the West Coast Mainline instead. Under the original plans, from the opening of Phase 2B, you'd see two 400-metre trains per hour running up HS2 and then the West Coast Mainline to Scotland. These would divide at Carlisle, with 200 metres heading to Glasgow and the other 200 metres heading to Edinburgh, with the journey from London to Edinburgh being completed in just 3 hours and 40 minutes. Whilst the extra capacity and time savings from Phase 2B look unlikely to materialise at this stage, I see no reason why the one train per hour service currently planned to run to Glasgow using Phase 1 infrastructure couldn't also divide at Carlisle to serve Edinburgh too, all whilst achieving journey times comparable to, or even slightly faster than, the current route via the East Coast Mainline. The next set of benefits I'll discuss, however, are dependent on delivery of the full high-speed network as originally envisaged. The crucial part here is the eastern leg, running through into Leeds with new terminating platforms, and running north of Leeds to join the existing network at Church Fenton, from which services could continue northwards on to terminate at Newcastle. Both of these branches would be served by frequent 400-metre long trains, allowing for a massive uplift in capacity and reduction in journey times for the intercity network. But the biggest benefits aren't actually on HS2 at all. You see, by taking these fast trains off the existing network, you free it up for many more local, regional and freight services. On the East Coast Mainline itself, this could take the form of a simplified, more frequent service that would stop at all the stations on the route, giving massive benefits to places like Grantham, Newark and Retford, which currently have most trains skipping them under the current timetable, as well as for much more freight to use the line. These benefits apply not just for the East Coast Mainline itself, but also its various feeders. For example, you could run more freight through to the port at Felixstowe, whilst for passengers you could take the London to Leeds expresses out of the existing Leeds station, where they currently sit and dwell for quite a long time, taking up platform capacity, and move them to the new dedicated terminus platforms, freeing up space in the existing station for many more local services, which would also be able to run more frequently from the lines into the station no longer being clogged up with intercity trains. And these benefits wouldn't just apply to the East Coast Mainline, but also the Midland Mainline, the cross-country route and the West Coast Mainline, as well as their various feeders. I hope this shows how the biggest benefits of HS2 aren't actually on HS2 itself, but on the existing network, which is why it's maddening that they weren't factored into HS2's business case at all. If they were, it would have made its cancellation look even more foolish than it already does. And trust me, it looks pretty bloody foolish. With that said, I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference anyway, as even with its business case not accounting for the off-network benefits, which I would like to reiterate is the main justification for the line, Phase 2A still had an incredibly strong business case and had been voted through Parliament. Construction was just about to start on it when it was cancelled at the last second. That proves to me that it was an ideological decision, not one based in facts and evidence. So, yes, there are enhancements you can make to the East Coast Mainline in terms of various new flyovers and signalling enhancements, and we absolutely should do those. But the only way to deliver the transformational change it needs long term is with HS2, which is currently in the process of having the land for the eastern leg sold off. Well,
Now, there is another idea, Crossrail 2. This is a proposal to build basically another Elizabeth line, but north to south, west, sort of. I don't know, here's a map. Theoretically, this would allow more Great Northern trains to run by removing the need to turn around at Moorgate, if Moorgate really is what the limit on frequency is. Although, I doubt that. But anyway, every proposal map I see has the line ending at New Southgate on its own tracks. Sort of like how the Elizabeth line ends at Abbey Wood. So it wouldn't even change anything on the East Coast Mainline other than reducing crowding, I guess. And anyway, that's a good 30 or 40 years out.
And the total cost of the projects that I listed earlier in the video costs around £13.4 billion. Now I want you guys to note that this is Network Rail's conservative estimate from like 10 years ago, which means that the price tag is billions more now. Which at that point, it would make more sense to just complete the eastern leg of High Speed 2. But hey, in the end of the day, bruh, in the end of the day, go subscribe to Mike and Luke's channels. Especially if you want that premium guy content. They both do excellent work. With that being said, if we earned your like and subscription, I love you. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching.